New fallout for Facebook. The Washington Post reporting the social media giant could face a record-setting fine over its data privacy scandal. The Federal Trade Commission's highest penalty on record is against Google for $22.5 million. What's your reaction to this? When I see an M instead of a B, I'm like,
Yeah. The legal fees that they'll spend could ellipse that. I think there's a cultural shift going on with this company because younger folks don't use it. They certainly use Instagram.
Which is owned by Facebook.
Which is owned by Facebook, right? Understood. But that's a separate story. But Facebook really is for sort of the baby boomers, and I don't think that there's a complete understanding of what really goes on there. So I think as more and more users, but you're starting to see people aren't checking as much. 26% deleted the app. So there's something going on there, and I think that it's going to impact that company if they don't get ahead of this.
Yeah, I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, right, CEO, making this kind of speech in Munich, which was very much a mea culpa. I mean, if you heard it, it sort of seemed like, okay, this is what I need to say to keep the regulators in Europe at bay and not breathing down our neck as much as they are. But to your point, I actually think there is an increased likelihood that the U.S. is going to go the way of that GDPR and really start to enforce some rules against big tech. Data, I'm with you, though, as far as, like, the millions, that doesn't really even. That's like Facebook's coffee budget.
Yeah.
It really. What were you going to say?
But I don't know who regulates it. I mean, what I can imagine is Congress decides to do something, and we can't even figure out for years what agency is going to be responsible for it. Is it the telecom industry? Is it the Federal Trade Commission? I don't know who's responsible for regulating.
I think, Mitch, I think you bring up a good point, and I think beyond that, I think even scarier is the idea that Congress is going to try to regulate Facebook. When you saw at the Zuckerberg hearing not too long ago, they were asking questions about, like, so when you run banner ads on WhatsApp, and I'm like, there's no banner ads on WhatsApp, it's encrypted, but I digress.
Almost as good as the Google questions about the iPhone, and the guy
exactly.
was like, that's actually not my
another company.
Yeah.
But I think you're also right. I mean, the point where, as the millennial on the panel, the point where my mom got on Facebook is the point where I started to sort of migrate off the platform.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of millennials,
or your grandmother's on it.
Yes.
What do you use? Snap?
Instagram.
Yeah. Okay.
Instagram, Twitter, more so.
But
Instagram,
they're still getting your data then.
So so Facebook is still getting my data regardless. It's just going to one of their other companies. But I do think that when it comes to, we've got to figure this out, and we've got to figure it out pretty quickly on how we regulate these tech companies. One, who's going to write the regs? And two, where are the regs going to go? Which agency will be responsible for these regulations? Because it's clear that regulations are going to happen.
Well, I've said this literally for years on our air, that if they don't do something to rein in their nefarious behavior, I'll use that term, then they're asking for the government to come in. This is well before the Cambridge Analytica
And the potential
scandal.
top cop has made recent comments, right? We spoke about that last week, about Barr saying, okay, yeah, I am going to look into privacy, data security, and how these companies function.
The biggest way that there are a couple of things that Washington can do, and this was when they rolled out Facebook Live, the live video streaming service, and people were killing other people on it and committing murders and suicides, and their reaction was, oops. No, it was oops. We didn't think about that before we rolled out that platform. But there are two things that I think Washington can do. One, there are liability protections for these social media companies for user-generated content because they're not treated like media companies. Washington can revisit that, and then also any other acquisitions these companies make. They could put the ixnay on that.
I tend to agree with that, and I also think that if you notice, there's two different strategies from the tech company. So Google, when they went down to Capitol Hill, they sort of said, yeah, regulations are good, and we'll work with you on them, which is very much a different strategy than the Facebook strategy of, I can't find the light switch.
Lobbying-wise, they spend the most time and the most money in D.C. They have been there for years. I mean, even when Eric Schmidt was pretty much based down there.
But they had to scramble after President Trump was elected to try and hire somebody who actually could speak Republican, I guess, that they kind of
But their infrastructure is there, I feel like,
they have a
more
big
than any other big
and
tech.
they have a different strategy. I mean, the strategy, when Sandeep went down there, he was talking about, yes, we're open to regulation. Here's what we think regulation could look like, whereas in Facebook, did none of that.
Yeah, but Google's, we should say Google's CEO showed up a lot later by basically they had to.
And after one day, had like the blank chair with just the Google.
Right. So he was reticent to show up in front of those lawmakers. Real quick, Mitch.
History has proven that when your industry is going to get regulated, get ahead of it and help the regulators figure it out. Don't fight with them.
Yeah, and I think that's the prevailing strategy that Google has over Facebook.
Yes, or a lot of the other companies too. They've got problems. Like look at Twitter. What happened on Twitter over the weekend? We'll talk about that later in the show.